Hi again. Welcome back everyone to Requirements Engineering. Thank you for taking the time. Today we'll talk about frameworks, templates, and standards. So first, I'm going to explain to you what a framework is in general, and then we will talk about a few examples for standards. So a framework in general is any generic means of structuring and organizing information. That means whenever you have used and structured and organized information in your life, you have used some kind of framework, whether that is in the sense of a shopping list and writing it down in categories, or whether that is in the sense of writing down an inventory, making a budget, whatever means of information you wanted to classify, you had some kind of framework to do this. Now, for requirements, there are different levels. We can start from a very simple requirements template for a single sentence to something that has more contextual information to something that has a framework for an entire specification. And we'll walk through those three stages. So first one, for an individual sentence, here's an example. The sentence template looks as you can see on the slide. First, there is a when condition, if there is a specific event that triggers your requirement, and then under what conditions are there any specific states that your system needs to be in order for that requirement even to be of relevance. And then we add a part where we say the system shall, should, or will, which states that the system is the actor in that case and how it should respond. And then we will introduce some word instead of process that will be more specific in terms of what is going to happen. And then we'll specify the things to be processed, the objects in this case. And then we may add on some more process details, maybe several of them. That's what the star indicates. And with that sentence template, we can make very specific and very clear what the system should do under specific circumstances. The downside is we can't add a lot of contextual information. We don't know who wrote the requirement, we don't know when it was recorded, we don't know what the rationale behind it was. We have just an individual, unambiguous requirement. To have unambiguous requirements, that's a pretty good thing. That's really big. But we do want more contextual information in some cases. So, problem here, missing contextual information. This is solved by templates like the Volere template. We have more detail, more attributes, more characteristics about individual requirements. So we know this requirement has an ID number, it's a type, and it refers to a certain event. We have a description for the requirement. The product shall record all the roads that have been treated. We have a rationale behind the requirement, that is, to be able to schedule untreated roads and highlight potential danger. We have somebody who authored this requirement or a stakeholder who issued it, in this case called the originator, Arnold Snow, the chief engineer. We also have something called a fit criterion. And the fit criterion is essentially how are we going to know when this requirement has been fulfilled? How can we test it? So the fit criterion to check whether this has been fulfilled is that the recorded treated roads shall agree with the driver's road treatment logs and shall be up to date within 30 minutes of the completion of the road's treatment. And then we see two customer satisfaction and dissatisfaction levels. Now we may be wondering why they have different levels for satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Shouldn't they be at the same level? No. The reason for that is if a requirement is very fundamental to the system, then the customer will expect that to be fulfilled. So if the satisfaction level in this case is only 3, whereas the dissatisfaction level is 5, that means it's a fundamental, very central requirement for the system. The customer expects it to be fulfilled and he will be highly dissatisfied, or she, if it does not get fulfilled. On the other hand, if we were to make up a nice to have requirement, then the satisfaction level may be very high because the customer says, oh, how wonderful that you even implemented this. but the dissatisfaction level would be low in case it does not get accomplished, because it was not a very fundamental requirement. And furthermore, what the Volere template enables us to do is to list dependencies. So we know in this case, all requirements using road and scheduling data are dependent on this requirement. We also have a feeling that it would be better to include the numbers of those requirements as opposed to a generic phrasing which requirements are being referred to. But for the sake of only having this one example, we'll let them get away with it. And we have one requirement that this conflicts with, and that's requirement number 105. We also see that we have further supporting materials, namely the work context diagram and the terms definitions in section 5. If you recall from the lecture on challenges, disagreement on vocabulary or missing agreement on terminology is one of the top 5 problems in requirements engineering. So this one has been solved in section 5 of the document. And we do have a history, so we know that this requirement was created on February 29th in 2010. While this is a rather simple template, it gives us a lot of contextual information that we may want to make use of at some point, and it is a standard that is used a lot across industries. I've seen it in many different domains. We are still at the level of individual requirements. We've solved the problem that we had about the missing contextual information from the simple requirements template, but we still don't know what would be a bigger framework for an entire requirement specification. And that's what we'll look at on the next slide. Before that, we'll take 1 minute time out for a discussion. So I want you to take a minute and reflect on what frameworks you have used in the past. So yes, spend a few seconds on what frameworks have I used to write down my shopping lists and organize my personal information, but also what kind of other frameworks have you come across in your professional setting for making budget calculations, for structuring supply chain information, for structuring stakeholders, any types of structuring mechanisms, for structuring code or test cases. How were those organized and what did they provide? That may also give you an idea of what you would want from a requirements engineering framework. After that, come back and watch the next slide with me. So, one of the 2 standards that we'll briefly talk about today is the IEEE 830. IEEE 830, you see it comes with 1998 behind it, which means this version is from 1998. So it's been around for quite a while, and it is a document template for software requirement specifications. I'll already tell you, this one has been superseded by now, but it's still fairly in use, and therefore I wanted to introduce it to you. So the first part of the table of contents is an introduction where the purpose and scope of a system are delineated, and then a section on definitions, acronyms, and abbreviations, as well as some references and a general overview of the system. In section 2, we get to the overall description, which includes a product perspective, the product functions or features, specific user characteristics, so we'll get to know our user groups, and then any system constraints that we may have, for example, from other systems that our system interacts with, and assumptions and dependencies that we have to know to be able to develop the system. The third section is concerned with specific requirements. So this is the largest section of your software requirement specification, and it will be organized according to what type of system you are developing. So there may be a fair difference in between developing a specification for a business information system versus an embedded system. So that's why they stayed on a higher level of granularity here. And then at the end, we'll have supporting information like the table of contents, the index, and some appendices. For example, on specific input and output formats, the technical background of some components used in there, or a description of the problem to be solved by the software if that was not detailed enough in the introduction. As I said, this one has been superseded, but it's still in use a lot, so it's good to know it. It has been superseded by the international standard 29148. It's the standard in the systems and software engineering family on lifecycle processes, more specifically, the one about requirements engineering. This edition has been published in 2011. So it replaces the 830 standard, and it also replaces 1233 and 1362. The standard contains provisions for the processes and products related to the engineering of requirements for systems and software products and services throughout their entire life cycle, not only during initial development. So this life cycle perspective is something that has been added on and is very valuable, because by now all the systems that we develop tend to be around for a long time. It defines the construct of a good requirement. It also gives us knowledge about additional attributes and characteristics that we should know about a requirement, and it discusses the iterative and recursive application of requirements processes throughout the entire lifecycle. The standard also provides guidance in the application of requirements engineering and management processes for any activities that are related to requirements engineering. And for that, they also refer to further standards to the 12207 and 15288. The information items applicable to the engineering of requirements and their contents are all defined in the standard. And the content can be added to the existing set of related lifecycle processes that are defined in those other two standards, or it can also be used independently. In this course, we'll only use it independently. A brief overview of the table of contents starts with the scope of the entire standard, and then it explains which other standards it conforms to and includes some normative references. And then we have a clarification of terminology, which is really valuable whenever we want to set up new requirements engineering processes in a company. So it includes a clarification of the concepts and then also of all processes. We have an explanation of all the information items that we may come across in a requirement specification, or that we should consider including in a requirement specification, and what the content of each of those items is. And then we have a couple of additional annexes for further details. So that's what I want you to look into. I'm providing a link to the specification, to the standard, and look into it. Go through at least the most important terms and concepts, and think about which of those definitions you have seen in other contexts and maybe in related disciplines, and think about whether they differ in any of their explanation of the terminology. Thank you for listening.